Super Mario Bros. Might be the most critically acclaimed video game in history. There's probably more videos about the design of this game than any other. You may have personally watched multiple videos just about the first level. This topic has been beaten to death, which is why today we're going to talk about this game in a way you've never heard before. Not on this channel, not anywhere. And we're starting right now. The first thing I have to say about Super Mario Bros. Is that this game is bad. Okay, wait, don't go anywhere. It's a good game. But the reasons why it's good, well, they run deep. So deep that there are things in this game which seem obviously bad, but actually contribute towards it being good. Stick around and you'll see what I mean. This is the unspoken and misunderstood genius of Super Mario Bros. Okay, first off, let's address the elephant in the room. I'm a speedrunner. I will naturally have a different relationship with this game and view certain aspects of it in a different light than most people. But as much as possible in this video, I'll be talking about things that apply to a general audience. We'll go over the good things this game does to give the average player a good experience. So yeah, no focusing on like glitches or wall clips, for example. And I mean, there's no need. Those things are obviously bad design. Like, look how easily you can clip into these walls.
Did I just hear someone on the internet criticizing a Nintendo game?
Whoa, is that Dan Salvato? The guy that made Doki Doki Panic?
Sure, the wall clips aren't What? Sure, the wall clips aren't literally good, but what about the system that makes them possible? Why do you think you can clip into the wall like that in SMB1, but you can't do that in The Great Giana Sisters?
Well, maybe it's just the superior game.
Look, the block collision in SMB1 is clearly at a level of genius beyond even your comprehension. The collision detection in SMB1 is actually far more complex than most other platformers of the time, and it's one of the biggest contributors to the feel of the game. Take this example. When you stand underneath this block and you jump, Mario is obviously going to hit his head against the block, right? But let's move over to the corner of the block. In this situation, do you think Mario will hit the block? Or will he miss the block and jump all the way up?
Let's see. From that spot, he should miss the block.
But that's really interesting, right? Mario kind of grazes against the block and it lets us make the jump. We don't think about it, but they had to write some really specific logic to make this work. So take a look at this. These green dots are an overlay that shows you Mario's tile collision. The collision for his head is only that one dot in the center, but then he also has those wide shoulders. So on a jump like this, his head actually misses the block, but then his shoulder hits the block. Whenever the game sees Mario's shoulder in a block, it pushes him out. This is what makes these grazing jumps possible, but it's also a safety mechanism to push us out of the wall, like in 1-2. It's awesome. On the other hand, let's go back to Great Giana Sisters. I can't even make this jump, that's so frustrating.
Oh, dude, they got this right in 1985, and they keep getting this wrong today. Mario Odyssey has some 2D sections, and it's really easy to get hung up on blocks when you're trying to jump around them to get on top. They definitely did a great job in SMB1 to make this situation feel good for the player.
Right. A big part of game design is making sure your game understands the intentions of the player and providing them with the expected outcome. If the player feels like they made the right move, but they get punished by some technicality, they're going to be upset. That's why Coyote Time is popular nowadays, where you actually have a few extra frames to jump even after you leave the ledge. It can make up for a lack of clarity based on where the character's feet are positioned, or even compensate for any input delay on your TV. The point is, leniency makes games feel good, and they understood that even back in the 80s. But still, in SMB1, there were definitely some places where they took the leniency a little too far. Like, I can stomp on this enemy while it's practically on top of my head. What's with that? I mean, the block collision is super sophisticated, but then the only requirement for stomping on an enemy is that you're moving downwards? I'd say that's a little oversimplified.
Ooh, okay, now it's my turn to set the record straight. You bring up a good point. The enemy stomping mechanics are kinda weird in this game. But let me show you something. Let's do a little exercise. We'll freeze Mario midair right here, and I want you and all the viewers at home to decide if Mario should stomp this enemy or not. What do you think? You have your guess? Alright, the answer is... it depends. What game are we playing? If this is Mario Maker, he dies. If this is SMB1, he survives. Now, I'm not saying the system in SMB1 is perfect, or without its fair share of jank, but what we have here works really well in this game specifically. You don't have the same level of aerial control here as you do in future games. And also, you can't hold jump to bounce higher off of enemies in this game. That didn't come until SMB3. Those two things really made for some entirely new gameplay, and it does make sense to tighten up the stomping mechanics a bit at that point. They're pretty solid most of the time. You still do get moments like this though. Speaking of SMB3, it's possible to take damage sometimes even if you do land on top of an enemy. This is obviously not on purpose, but it goes to show how easy it is to have bugs like this crop up in game development, and makes SMB1 all the more impressive. They got so much right on their first try. Plus, another little thing with stomping on enemies, it's actually not as simple as just checking if you're moving downwards. The game does actually check if you land on top of an enemy. Why does it do this if you can stomp them lower anyway? Well, it's so you can stomp enemies while moving upwards. It feels so natural. The devs clearly did a lot of playtesting, and they must have run into situations where it didn't feel right to die to an enemy. Like maybe jumping into a Paracupa like this, or glancing a bullet bill on the way up. You'll even automatically stomp Cheep Cheeps if they jump directly up into you. It's really cool that they made sure to resolve these scenarios and make them feel right for the player, in situations where the player deserves to succeed.
Hold on, that's actually really interesting. You're saying they have both cases, one where you can stomp on an enemy simply by moving downwards, and one where it checks where your feet are. So yeah, the only explanation is that they wanted it that way. I seriously thought that was like a byproduct of them taking a shortcut. But on the topic of leniency, can we take a look at these enemy hitboxes? Why are they so ridiculously tiny? In fact, the topic of this Piranha Plant hitbox comes up all the time. I don't want to think it was a mistake, but it seems hard to come up with a justification.
Once again, let's use an example to explain this one, but a counterexample this time. Everyone, and I mean everyone, who has played enough Mario Maker has had this happen to them. This hitbox is not good. Just a quick debrief so no one gets left out. Hitboxes are how games decide if you should take damage. So like in SMB1, there's a box around Mario and a box around enemies. And if these boxes ever overlap, you die. Hitboxes don't always match the exact shape of the enemy. I mean, they're just that, a box. And most enemies aren't shaped exactly like squares. Actually, it can be pretty bad for a hitbox to match up perfectly with an enemy. When you're working with boxes, you have to be careful. If you don't give any leniency, it's really easy for corners to overlap. And that's exactly what's going on with the spikes in Mario Maker 2. If Mario's little pinky toe grazes the corner of a spike, you die. That's just not ideal and not fun for the player. On that note, let's get back to SMB1 and talk about the enemy with the most infamous hitbox in the game, Piranha Plants. These things have spawned literally thousands of YouTube comments on speedrun videos. You very notoriously can jump straight through a large portion of the Piranha Plants. Given the nature of these old games, it would be easy to conclude that this is some kind of mistake. Lots of games around this time period had all sorts of inaccurate hitboxes. Is this not just another one of those cases? Well, I'll propose 3 explanations. Number 1, they made a mistake and didn't catch it before the game released. This doesn't seem likely to me, but either way, they were okay with how the game was playing and didn't see a need to change it, so that in itself tells us something at least. Number 2, they did this to save space. Now, it's no secret that Super Mario Bros. Was made with a really tiny amount of memory to work with. If you take a look at this picture showing all of the enemies and their hitboxes, you'll notice something. There's a lot of overlap. Some enemies have special hitbox shapes, like Hammer Bros for example, but for the most part, they got away with using only 2 hitbox sizes. Koopas are the same size as Lakitu, Lakitu is the same size as mushrooms, and so on. And then there's this other group of enemies that all share the same hitbox size. Goombas, Cheep Cheeps, Bloopers, and even Piranha Plants. Maybe Piranha Plants ended up with this hitbox because they only had space to make a handful of different sizes. Not a bad theory, but if we go with this explanation, why didn't they just give them the hitbox from that first group of enemies? It seems like it would fit at least a little bit better. Might I suggest it's because? Number 3, they playtested their game and decided to make it that way on purpose. Now, I won't claim to know the exact reason they wanted it that way. It could be they wanted it to seem like Mario's falling down into the jaws before he dies, or maybe they were getting hit by them right as they were popping out, or when they hadn't quite gone down all the way. and they decided they wanted it to be more lenient. Leniency makes games feel good, after all. Think about it. Have you ever walked away from a play session of a game and said, you know, this game's decent, but it could really use some bigger hitboxes? Most likely not. Instead, you've probably had moments with super close calls and said things like, whoa, how am I still alive? And you've probably also gotten really excited when you barely made it out of a tight situation. That's the kind of experience you want. What you don't want is this. They did end up making the Piranha Plant hitboxes bigger in Super Mario All-Stars, and that leads to situations like this happening. And actually, that's with the hitbox still not covering the entire plant. Here's something else I noticed while staring at all these hitboxes. The enemies that you regularly stomp on, the ones that the player has to aim for and make sure they touch in order to defeat them, those enemies generally have pretty accurate hitboxes. Not perfect matches, but good enough for you to stomp on them. But here's the interesting part. The enemies you want to avoid, the ones you don't want to touch at all, those ones seem to generally have smaller hitboxes. You can go through blooper tentacles, you can jump through piranha plants, and this fireball, man. What is this? I used to think this was a mistake, but now I'm not so sure. What do you think? Anyway, that's my synopsis of how this hitbox, which might seem poorly made, is actually a bit of good game design. I'm not saying it has to be this extreme all the time, but give the player some room. And for the record, SMB1 is not perfect. Bowser's hitbox is a little egregious, and the hammers, they're bad. I will not make excuses for these. Something else I won't make excuses for are some weird aspects of the physics in this game. If you've watched enough of my videos, you'll know that you accelerate faster backwards than you do forwards. That's definitely weird. And in general, I'm sure a lot of people feel like the mid-air physics in this game can be kind of stiff and hard to control.
Okay, let's talk about the physics. Here's my question. What would you consider to be the #1 most groundbreaking feature of this game?
Oh, I know. Did you say groundbreaking?
When you jump, you can move Mario in mid-air. The simple decision to let Mario move around in mid-air changed platformers forever. I mean, look at all these other games with platforming elements, some of which even came out after SMB1. Donkey Kong, can't control your jump. Ghosts and Goblins, can't control your jump. Ice Climber, can't control your jump. Castlevania, Mario Bros, Pitfall, Prince of Persia, Impossible Mission. Basically, the game design consensus at the time was that if your character had too much freedom of movement, then there wouldn't be any challenge. Someone actually had to sit down and decide, hey, I can make a character that's really fun to move around, and I can still challenge the player. That man? Shigeru Miyamoto. But it turns out it's really difficult to make physics that are fun and feel good. You want to be able to start moving pretty quickly, but you don't want to blast right up to full speed. You want to be able to correct your jumps, but you can't have too much freedom in the air, because then your decisions have no commitment to them. One especially important detail is that you need to be able to stop quickly. Have you ever played an old platformer that just feels really slippery, like you try to jump up onto a small platform and you just slip off? That's actually a result of the physics being too simple. You need different acceleration values for different situations. If the player wants to stop moving, you gotta quickly bring them to a stop. And SMB1 does this in a pretty elegant way. Basically, if you're moving in one direction, but you're facing the other direction, such as when you're skidding on the ground, then your acceleration is doubled, which makes you stop faster. Pretty cool, right? There's just one tiny oversight. You can also make this happen by jumping backwards. You're facing left and moving right, so your acceleration is doubled. So even though Mario has less control in the air, jumping backwards for one frame comes out to be just a tiny bit faster than running normally. Yeah, what a travesty. I'm sure Miyamoto will never forgive himself for that one.
Okay, you got me. The code for the physics in SMB1 was clearly way ahead of the stuff that came before it. But that doesn't mean that it's good by today's standards, right? Like, look at every 2D Mario game that came out after this one. They all have floatier jumps and give you more mid-air control.
It's more subjective than you think. Yeah, if you took SMB1 physics and put them into SMB3, it would feel awful, but that's obvious because the game was designed for a different physics system. SMB1 is strictly left to right. The entire game is designed around the challenge of planning and executing your jumps. Again, this kind of jumping was brand new, so the challenge was the jumping itself. By the time we get to SMB3, Mario can literally fly. Now there's a vertical component to the challenge, and you can even explore the level to find different paths and areas. Jumps are floatier because the game is more aerial, more vertical. In 1985, you jump to either land on a platform or stomp on an enemy, but now it's 1989 and the world knows how to jump. So jumping is treated as more of a basic part of your movement kit, and you're given new challenges that have you making decisions even while you're midair. SMB1 was purpose-built for a system. If you think it feels stiff and hard to control, it's because you're conditioned by a different system designed for a different set of challenges. And you know what? It turns out that people still have fun playing games that are focused on planning your jumps. So it's not like the other systems have obsoleted it. It's just more trendy nowadays to maximize freedom of movement. I say we bring back clunky controls.
I'm down. Plus, that was really only talking about horizontal movement. SMB1 also did an incredible job with controlling your jump vertically. If they stuck with the way things were in Donkey Kong, with only one jump height, the game would have ended up looking like this. But instead, you can do big jumps, small jumps, release your jump halfway through if you change your mind. It's great. This game has 32 different jump heights. Part of this development happened between Donkey Kong and SMB1, in the Mario Bros. Arcade game. Not Super Mario Bros., just Mario Bros. For that game, they had the revolutionary idea to remove fall damage. That's right, it was revolutionary at the time. Miyamoto originally tried to make things pretty realistic in Donkey Kong, and you die from, honestly, not that far of a fall. But then, the legend Gunpei Yokoi suggested that they should let Mario jump down from higher places. That really opened the door, and led to what we have in Super Mario Bros. And beyond. So, to summarize everything so far, SMB1 broke a lot of ground giving the player new ways to jump and move, and designing how Mario interacts with the world. Even now, the game generally feels good and is enjoyable to play. Given the limitations of the hardware, they did a ridiculously good job. However, there are some areas where the limiting factors did show themselves, and I want to bring up some of those. I'm sure they did their best given their circumstances at the time, but for example, isn't it funny that you can't scroll to the left in this game? Surely the player wants to go left sometimes. Could you explain that one for us, Dan?
Oh, that's actually good game design too.
What?
Nah, I'm just kidding, they didn't do it for game design reasons, but there is a good reason for it, and what they did was pretty impressive. It all comes down to the size of the game cartridge. And this has been talked about before. It comes up a lot in videos about the NES, how the original games were only up to 40 kilobytes in size, and later they used memory mappers to fit more stuff into the cartridge, but that's not the whole picture here. So SMB1 has 32 levels. Let's estimate that each level takes up, I don't know, a kilobyte? Let's say half a kilobyte because they're probably pulling off some techniques to store this data really efficiently. So in total that's like 16 kilobytes, maybe as little as 12 kilobytes if we consider that a few levels have the same layout as each other. That's a pretty good educated guess, but do you know how much space the level data actually takes up? Less than 3.4 kilobytes. Yeah, the tile data for all 32 levels, including the warp pipe rooms, the coin heaven, the crazy layouts in the castle levels, it only takes up a little more than 8% of the cartridge space. Even the music data is like 1.3 kilobytes? My point is, the game is so complex that they hardly had any room to store the actual game assets. I bet you didn't think so much of those 40 kilobytes were taken up by code, did you? Yeah, code takes up space too, and there's a lot of it to handle all that complex game logic. So anyway, how did they manage to store so much level data in such a small space? The secret is that they're not storing data for every single block. SMB1 tiles fall into two categories, terrain and objects. Different terrain patterns have different IDs. The terrain in 1-1 is pattern number 1. In 1-2, this terrain pattern, which includes the ceiling, is pattern 2. In total, there are 16 patterns, all with different heights for the floor and ceiling. We even have some crazy patterns which have a big middle section, not just the floor and the ceiling. So all these blocks aren't even stored in the level data. The level just specifies a terrain pattern at the start, and each new column on the screen starts off by drawing that terrain before adding the other objects. The cool thing is, one of the objects in the level is actually a command to change the terrain pattern, so you can get some really dynamic level layouts, and it only takes a few bytes to pull off. So that's how the terrain works, but it gets more interesting. Most of the blocks in the game aren't stored as individual blocks, but as larger objects. For example, this row of bricks is one object. You just need the row, the column, and the length. Same with these mushroom platforms, they're just one object where you can change the height and the length. Kind of like in Mario Maker, funnily enough. So you have all kinds of objects for rows of question blocks, columns of bricks, pipes, Bowser's Bridge, the little castle structure at the end of the level. Even the staircase is an object. And you know how much space an object takes up? 2 bytes. So yeah, you're getting a lot of mileage out of those 2 bytes. And that's why you can't go backwards in SMB1. The game moves forward 1 column at a time, only caring about what objects are coming up next in the level data. If you could go backwards, how would the game know to start drawing this row of blocks from the end when the starting position is all the way back here? It's not impossible, but it would make the level rendering system way more complicated. It would take up more cartridge space, use up more memory, and give the CPU more work to do. So yes, it's a compromise that you can't go left, but it's a beautiful one that gives us 32 sprawling levels on a tiny cartridge. Speaking of compromises, I was watching some runs done by my favorite speedrunner, Nifscosmic, and I noticed that there were issues with the sprites despawning. Like, there should be 3 enemies in a row here, not 2. It's not like this game ever has all that much happening on the screen, so it's weird that even in normal gameplay you can run into this issue.
Yeah, sprites despawning. This will be a perfect topic to cap things off. And that's because this is yet another area where they did a really beautiful job with this game. See, sprites despawning is a huge issue, and also not an issue at all. It's something that happens constantly, but also very rarely. It has a huge effect on gameplay, and yet no effect. Let me explain what I mean. The game has several available slots in memory to load sprites into. I won't go too deep into it, because this previous video of mine covered a lot of it. But basically, while these are all full, no more sprites can spawn. This can most easily be seen with piranha plants. From 1-2 onwards, anytime there's a pipe with no piranha plant in it, that means the piranha plant despawned. So yeah, this is something that happens a lot. But the thing is, it's not a big deal if a piranha plant despawns here or a Goomba despawns there. You'll hardly notice, and it barely affects gameplay. But if, say, Bowser despawned, that would be a lot more noticeable. You've probably never even thought about this before, but there's usually not a lot of enemies in castle stages, and never right by Bowser. Sometimes you will have a Podoboo, a Firebar, maybe a platform, but for Bowser to despawn, you'd have to have 5 sprites already before loading him. Doing that is possible in 4-4 by waiting around for 3 fireballs, plus the Firebar, plus the Podoboo. But even then, it's pretty tight. Only like a 1/5 of a second window where all 3 fireballs are on screen and he won't spawn in. So yeah, very unlikely for this to happen to you on accident. Alright, is there anything else in the game that would be terrible if it despawned? If I had to pick, I'd say moving platforms despawning would probably be the worst thing possible. And unfortunately, there is a spot in this game where we run into this issue. This spot in 5-3 can have a platform despawn. But I do think it's not quite as bad as it seems. 5-3 is a remake of 1-3. Originally, they only put 4 sprites in this area, ensuring that the platforms would spawn. But later in the game, there's a handful of levels which we play a second time, with added difficulty. 5-3 is one of these, a harder version of 1-3, with bullet bills firing all the time. This introduces some extra sprites into the mix, and that can lead to this platform despawning. But really, this issue only comes up if you're speedrunning. If you take your time in this section, stomp any of the enemies, let the Goomba fall down, anything, then the platform will spawn. And even if it doesn't, you can still make the jump by waiting for the platform to move to the right. Again, not really an issue unless you're doing a speedrun. And in speedruns, we just stomp this Goomba to dodge the despawn every time. Anyway, that's really the main place in the game where something like this could happen to you. The point I want to make is that this is something that could happen all the time, but rarely ever does, and that's no accident. If you analyze each level, you'll see that they were always designing around this. Crucial areas will be free of enemies to ensure the important sprites load in. They make sure to give enough lead up for other sprites to go off screen before you arrive at vulnerable areas. They put up walls and pits to prevent enemies from following you to places that would lead to fatal despawns. Even the staircase at the end of levels acts as a natural barrier to keep enemies away from despawning the flag. Most of the time. To wrap this all up, they did an amazing job working within the limitations of this game. They had to design the levels using very little memory, like Dan was saying, and they carefully placed sprites in them in a way where despawning wouldn't ruin your experience. And you, as the player, don't notice these compromises. You don't think about them while playing because the game is designed very well around them and is still fun.
You know, that's the general theme we have going on here. SMB1 is just full of this meticulous, deliberate design that you don't even realize is there until it gives itself a reason to be noticed. We don't have time to cover every little thing, but I think I got the point across. Super Mario Bros., good game. I think we can leave it off here. So, see you all next time, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Are you trying to end my video? Dan, please. We're just getting started. Sure, they did great with all that stuff, but what about crouch swimming, the color palette glitch, scale platform inheritance,
Okay, so that,
Koopas stuck in the ground, power-up jumps, low gravity,
I'm sure we can come up with.
invisible block clips, horizontal screen wraps, vertical screen wraps, and soft locking on the flagpole. To name a few.
This game sucks. Let's go play Great Gianna Sisters.
If you made it this far, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I love learning about the science behind these games. There's always more little details to learn. If you enjoy learning about these things through my videos, you may be interested in this video's sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant is a platform where you can learn new skills in math, programming, data analysis, and so on. It lets you do interactive lessons at whatever pace you choose. Take programming, for example. You could be brand new and not sure where to start, or you could be weird like me and start making YouTube videos full-time right after getting your computer science degree. Either way, Brilliant has something for you. I'd been looking for ways to keep my coding skill sharp while I've been busy, playing Mario, and Brilliant allows for that. But yeah, again, there's a bunch of courses in math, AI, and data as well. If you're interested in trying it out, go to brilliant.org/cosmic or scan the QR code on screen. You'll get to try everything free for 30 days, and you can get 20% off of an annual premium subscription.